He's not testifying. Donald Trump is still talking a lot. Yesterday, he unleashed a new line of attack against Judge Juan Merchan upon leaving the courthouse. The former president accused the judge of hating him and having bias against him because of where the judge comes from.
The judge hates Donald Trump. Just take a look. Take a look at him. Take a look at where he comes from. He can't stand Donald Trump. He's doing everything in his power.
Sam, what's he talking about?
I mean, this is typical Trump, right? This is the same exact or version of the line he did back in the 2016 campaign where he said the judge against him in the Trump University case was biased because he was from Mexico. He wasn't as explicit in this case.
That was pretty clear.
Where he comes from could be, and I think deliberately, phrased to be interpreted however the viewer wants, but I think we all know what the implication was. And, you know, all of this is sort of surreal, right? Like that statement in its own right would have been a shock to the system 6-7 years ago. And it was. I remember how we felt when it first happened.
Yeah.
But it's become sort of normalized because we've been so inundated with Trump. And I think on the macro scale, too, we've just had a 15-minute conversation about a potential that the presumptive GOP nominee might have a guilty verdict in a hush money payment for a porn star. And I think sometimes we don't really step back and say to ourselves that what we're living through is a very tense, tumultuous, and frankly, a surreal life. And I think the thing that's almost more interesting than all of that is the degree to which, and if you talk to Democrats, they'll admit this as much, the degree to which it's not breaking through. And by that I mean the polls don't move, Trump's base doesn't move. We have lawmakers who are willingly going to the court to stand beside.
There's an acceptance happening.
Yeah, there's an acceptance, exactly. There's acceptance to it, and it's become baked into our political psyche at this juncture.
Well, I mean, Elizabeth, it says it's far more than just concerning or nerve-wracking. I mean, this is just open, blatant racism that has now been sort of mainstreamed into American political life. This did shock people back in 2016 when he was talking about the judge from Mexico. But here's a guy now that says, take a look at him. Look at him. See where he's from. And I will tell you, this is what separates Donald Trump, for, let's say, I'll just speak for myself, from me or from most Americans. I look at him and go, Madison Avenue, Upper East Side. That's what I see when I see him, and I'm dead serious. Donald Trump speaks in code because he wants people to see the judge as another. Everybody's another unless their immigrant parents were from Scotland and Germany. And so you have people, and I'll just go back to it. What did John Meacham call it? The clubhouse, clubhouse set that are totally fine with
the grill.
A guy, the grill, the men's club grill at country clubs that are perfectly fine voting for a guy who talks about vermin, a Nazi term, who also uses sort of the fascist slogan of go back to where you came from for sitting members of Congress that don't happen to be white. And then yesterday, just take a look at him. Just seriously, like, what is this, 1933? It still needs to be shocking to us today.
But you know, and Trump has also said we need more people coming from Norway and the Scandinavian countries. That's pretty out there as well. But I think this has been going on since 2016, 2015, and the population has become just used to it. Can you imagine if another politician had said something like this? We'd be talking about it for days. With Trump, it's just, we're used to it. It's discounted.
And he's bringing up a whole new set of generation, I was trying to think of the right word, category of politicians who do speak this way. And you see them in Congress. And again, the reaction, there's so much of it, Joe, that it's hard to keep track. And again, you know, without going into the origins of fascism and cults, that's exactly how it starts. When there's chaos, there's a fire hose of this type of information, and it's too much to keep up with. And overall, communities and different, whether it's the media or voters or political organizations, become desensitized.
Yeah, and and the voters, I won't say they become desensitized because that's giving them far too much leniency. The fact is, well, I mean, they're voting for a racist. It is an active choice to vote for someone who said in December of, and I know this because I was a lifelong Republican who on this show in early December of 2015, when he was talking about Muslim registries, saying, I would never vote for a man like that in my life, regardless of if it were my father or a woman, if it was my mother, I would never, right? That's an active choice to say, I'm going to vote for him even though he's supporting Muslim registries. I'm going to vote for him even though he's using the old fascist line, go back to where you came from. I'm going to vote for him. These men grill enablers are saying when he says, just take a look at him. Look at where he's from. This isn't a passive choice. This isn't oh, I'm so numbed, I can't even hear what he's saying. No, Caddy, this is them hearing that he's a racist, hearing that a racist. These are racist terms. They would have been used by everybody in both parties. I keep going back to that Iowa Congressman King, who got kicked out of the caucus for saying far less in 2015.
By other
there's
Republicans.
No Trump. By the Republicans. This is no Trump derangement syndrome, because Republicans and Democrats pre-Donald Trump in 2016 would have considered any of these statements disqualifying. Now, Caddy, it is an active decision by members of the Republican Party, by members of the United States Senate, by members of the United States House, by Republicans, men grill enabler Republicans, by anybody that's voting for him, to vote for someone who's for a Muslim registry, to vote for somebody who talks about vermin like Hitler did, and vote for people who said, go back to where you came from, for members of Congress who aren't white, and are now looking at judges who, again, I'm sorry, look very American to me, and I just would never think, where did he come from? But for Donald Trump, it's all us versus the others, saying about this judge, oh, he's not going to be fair to me. Look at him. Look at where he comes from. Look at him. I'm sorry. He looks like an American to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. Look at that. That guy looks like, I don't know, looks like one of my law professors, looks like an attorney that I may have sat across the table with, looks like a businessman that I may have dealt with some. But for Trump, he hears a name and he goes, look at him. Look at where he came from. And people are actively choosing, when they go in to vote for this guy, to vote for a bigot, a fascist, a man who says he wants to be an authoritarian and a dictator on day one.
Yeah, I mean, if this were another politician who had not used the kind of language Trump had used before, you could interpret Trump's comments, and he phrases it carefully, as saying this guy comes from New York and therefore he's a Democrat and he will be prejudiced against me. But because we know that Donald Trump has a track record specifically of calling out judges who have come from Hispanic countries, there is an implication here that when he says the words, look at him, I mean, look at, not that there is much to see, but look at him, there is an implication that's what he's doing. But you're right about the otherization. And when you talk to people who study what it takes to have democracies fall or authoritarian regimes rise, the two things they point to are you have to have normalization of politically violent language, and you have to demonize the other, whatever the other is from your context. And I think we've seen both of those things happen.
Add a third,
otherization,
otherization, demonization, and celebrating violence, whether it's Paul Pelosi or January 6 defendants. He loves to celebrate people who have broken the law and defaced our Capitol and committed violence.
But there is hypocrisy because, you know, in Charlottesville, when the other was the people who were walking down saying Jews will replace us, there were not very many Republicans who came out and criticized.
Coming up. New polling finds President Joe Biden and Donald Trump battling in every swing state, but Biden making up significant ground from just last month. In the latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, Trump leads in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, while Biden leads in Michigan. But after the survey showed Trump up by 8 points in Nevada last month, the new poll finds the two candidates tied. Biden has also cut Trump's 6-point lead in Georgia to 3 points and his 4-point lead in Wisconsin to just 1 point, while making similar gains in Arizona and North Carolina. All of these results, Joe, are within the margin of error.
Well, especially in the 3 states that really matter the most right now, which, of course, the upper Midwest states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But, you know, J-Mart, we're going to state what everybody knows. It's May. These things are so random. As I was saying before, the Morning Joe betting lines were open, and we were giving the plus 13 after the New York Times Siena poll, the plus 13 in Nevada, which
you could have made a lot of money that day. Yeah,
we would have piled on as much money as we made, we did from unsuspecting Frenchmen who thought that Macron actually was going to lose to Le Pen when everybody was saying that. We put the over-under at 58.5, and we're right. But here, let's just talk about the randomness of these polls, J-Mart, because you know this better than anybody. You've talked to the campaigns. In this poll, the only state they have Joe Biden ahead in is the one state in the upper Midwest where his campaign thinks he faces the toughest currents, and that is Michigan. Right? That's Michigan, right? They think they're comfortably ahead, though they would never say it in front of a camera in Wisconsin. They're feeling pretty good there. And then again, Nevada, here we're talking about a 13-point lead, then a 7-point lead last month, now a dead heat. Right. I mean, all of these states are going to be so close, and Nevada's just one of those states. I don't know how they do it, but it's always close, and Democrats always end up winning. So, way too early, baby.
Yeah.
Way too early. But any
still
takeaways?
A snapshot.
Yeah,
still
the last time,
snapshot.
I think
it's close.
It's very close. The last time that a Republican carried Nevada was Bush in 2004. That's 2 decades now. So it does tilt Democratic. I will say the sort of Harry Reid organization out there is superb. This is their tallest task yet. Trying to keep Biden is going to be enormously difficult. But Nevada's important, though, because it does give Biden some tiny insurance policy if he can stay competitive there. Otherwise, he has to run the inside straight, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. He can't afford to lose a single one of those. And that's where the ball game is, Joe. It's in those 3 Big Ten states. Look, I think they're all basically a toss-up right now. Here's the good news for Biden. He's got 3 governors in all of those states who are Democrats who have a lot on the line, too, who need to really pull out a win, 2 of which want to run for president themselves in 2028, Whitmer and Shapiro. So they have a lot to help for themselves and for Joe Biden.
And very proven ground games. You know, I got a lot of faith in those operations.
Yeah, I mean, the ground game is kind of like a field goal in football. If you can get the score down to about 3 points, the ground game really matters, right?
Yeah.
If he's down 13 in Nevada, it doesn't matter at all, right?
Correct. Yeah, look, I was in Nevada over the weekend talking to the delegates of the Nevada Democratic Party convention. A lot of frayed nerves, but a lot of confidence in the ground game, in part because the Republicans right now don't have one. It's not that they have one, but it's not as good. They don't have one. Now, they will end up with one. I think that, you know, the concern has to be for the Biden campaign that directionally, when all the polls are pointing in one direction, 1 point, 5 points. It usually means that that's where things are. But on the other hand, we've seen these swing state polls fluctuate. And that's what Democrats are hoping to do, is get this into a jump ball when early voting starts, so that the edge they have in the field can make the difference and push Biden over the top.
And, Joe, to David's point, I mean, they're close. These are close, and it shows there's work to do for the Biden campaign in so many different directions.
I'm torn. Because I love American democracy.
Me too.
And at the same time, I hate listening to Democratic bedwetting every day. I want them to be scared, so they'll work harder. I want them to be wetting their bed every morning so they get up and work harder all day.
Okay,
I don't want to tell them that they have money on. Exactly. Yeah. You get up, watch Morning Joe. I'll tell you it's okay. You clean yourself off and you go out and you work hard all day. But there is an awful lot of bedwetting here when you consider, Claire, you've done this. You've done this on a very large level.
Yes,
They've got the money. They've got the ground game. They've got the non-fascist candidate. They're outworking. They're outworking Trump. Even when Trump's off, he's golfing or he's doing other loony things. And you know, I don't want to tell people I feel good about this, but I feel good about this. I think if they work harder, they keep having more money, and they build that ground game. You look at Wisconsin; they're probably the best party chairman in the nation in Wisconsin. And then you put the governor on top of that, do the same in Michigan, do the same in Pennsylvania, a couple great governors there. You know what? They've got a lot going in their favor.
Yeah, and don't forget, we have Senate candidates in those states, too. And they are doing remarkably well. If this is all about changing parties, somebody needs to let the folks that are responding to polls in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, let them know that those Senate candidates support the same policies that President Biden has embraced. And, you know, last night, Joe, I was looking really carefully. It's really interesting to see which party is going to be more extreme, because typically the party that is most extreme has the most difficulty in these states that swing back and forth. You look at what happened in Oregon last night, where you had very progressive candidates from local DA in Portland all the way to 2 open congressional seats, and the moderates won. They swept the table. Wow. So I think that what you're seeing here is a coming home to understanding that Joe Biden is a decent man with loads of integrity. And for those swing voters, that's going to matter. And the more Donald Trump talks, he is way more extreme today than he was ever in 2016 or 2020. He is saying things that he didn't even think about saying back in those elections. And the more he's out there, the more it's going to help Joe Biden.
Far more extreme. Again, Joe Biden, you know, it's never going to look like Beatlemania when Joe Biden steps off a plane going to an event. Joe Biden's about normalcy. And by the way, if you don't think that's a winning message in 24, you're not talking to the right voters who, even if they voted for Trump in 16, are exhausted now. I do want to say, Mika, following up on what Claire said, let's compare what happened in Oregon last night, which, thank God, they voted in some moderate DAs. Thank God, after the chaos in Oregon over the past 8 years, maybe they're returning to the middle. I mean, they already, like, you know, handing out, you know, heroin and gum machines up there. It's just absolute lunacy. Lunacy. And so thank God the voters said enough of that. And we want moderate DAs. We want a moderate approach. We actually want to hold criminals, responsible for crimes. So that's important. But we can go from Oregon on this extremism to North Carolina. I never thought I would say this, but the extremism of the Republican Party in North Carolina and their gubernatorial candidate, and I think their candidate for Commissioner of Education, I don't know if I have that title right, are so extreme.
Yeah.
They actually have put North Carolina into play, which I would have told you 3 months ago was not possible.
Right. Well, just to counter your earlier statement, I don't feel good about this. So you can.
There you go. Work harder, everybody. She's scared.
I don't feel good about this as a candidate, and with many members of the Republican Party who do not adhere to norms and have no boundaries, do not respect the law, do not respect human life, do not respect a woman's right to choose, do not respect, do not respect, do not respect. So,
and that's why they're going to lose.
I do not feel good about this. So, since it's kind of all connected, let's talk about the Supreme Court. Former President Obama advisor Dan Pfeiffer is warning about the impact a second Trump term could have on the Supreme Court. Here's what the Pod Save America co-host said.
Think about the stakes of the Supreme Court. If Donald Trump wins, he will almost certainly get 2 more appointments. By the end of Trump's term, second term were he to win, Thomas will be 82. Alito will be 78.
They're definitely retiring.
They're definitely retiring.
If Trump wins again.
And it could be just KBJ, like holding down the fort.
And Justice Sotomayor will be 72 at the end of Trump's term. So he will definitely get 2 appointments. If he has 2 appointments, that means he will have appointed 5 Supreme Court justices, all of whom will be around or below the age of 60 when he leaves office. That is a court majority, a MAGA court majority that will rule for decades. We can win the next however many presidential elections, and absent something sort of extraordinary happening, Trump's fingerprints will be all over the Supreme Court. And so I think we should make this a big issue. And we know this works because in 2016, that vacant Justice Scalia seat that McConnell held open was one reason, and you heard this on a lot of focus groups and post-election surveys, that Republicans who did not like Trump at the last minute were willing to hold their nose and vote for Trump because they cared about the Supreme Court. So I think we can do that in reverse.
Here we go, Sam Stein. I mean, this thought of that Supreme Court under a second Trump term and women's rights have already been scaled back. Our health is now less safe because of Donald Trump and Supreme Court choices. Imagine exactly what Dan Pfeiffer is imagining moving forward. It's frightening.
Well, a couple things here. One is if Trump is to lose this November, it will almost certainly be because of his appointees to the Supreme Court. By that I mean he has himself taken credit for appointing the justices who overturned Roe by the issuance of Dobbs. And that line, that individual line, more than anything else up to this point, I think, is the most determinative line of the election. So I think the Supreme Court, Dan is absolutely right, is a monumental issue in that sense. Secondarily, Dan's also right about the actuary tables, right? The justices are getting older. The next president likely will get to appoint 1 or 2. I think there's probably going to be an incentive for the 2 conservative justices to stay on if Biden is reelected. But yes, this is an issue up for debate. And then 3, I think the sort of larger, sort of more morbid discussion is this really the way we want the Supreme Court to be decided? I mean, we're basically waiting for someone to croak.
Oh, no.
And there's larger conversations to be had about reforming the court to make it so that you do not have this type of intense governing entity be decided by someone's health, well-being, but rather you can do something that has term limits or structures it so that every president gets a certain amount of appointments. That discussion is not happening. I just want to be clear.
Right.
But maybe it should be happening.
But it still leads to the... Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I just say, Mika, this is an extraordinarily important discussion that needs to continue to be had. I wrote a column about this in the Washington Post about 4 years ago where I laid it out directly. There has to be court reform. You can't have, like, for instance, Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was overturned because Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to an event, got sick, and died. History hung on that balance. The right, a 50-year right, ended because of that. And it is this ghoulish spectacle of people trying to hang on for dear life until their party comes into power. James Fallows has been on our show before and has talked about the expansion of the Supreme Court that has been thought out for the last 20, 30 years, where each president gets 2 selections and you term limit. You term limit Supreme Court justices. I think America may be the only Western power that has judges appointed for life. It's a crazy process. Now, here's the reason why conservatives who's, faux conservatives, phony conservatives, will blow their stack over this. They'll go, oh, this is not constitutional. You're undermining. No, we're not undermining the Constitution. If we do this as a country, if we try to depoliticize this process, well, we're reforming the United States Supreme Court, Mika, George Washington obviously set it up. Adams tried to do it. Thomas Jefferson changed the number of people on the court. Andrew Jackson changed the number of people on the court. Abraham Lincoln changed the number of people on the court. After Lincoln's death, they changed the number of people on the court. This is something that happened regularly until the 20th century. FDR tried it, and it went sideways for him. So then every president was like, whoa, not going to do that again. Mm-hmm. But maybe they decided not to do that for political reasons because it ended so badly for FDR. But the Constitution provides for this, and I would love to see Republicans and Democrats in the future look at what Sam's talking about, and that is a reform of the Supreme Court that expands the court, that has term limits for federal judges, and gives every president 2 Supreme Court picks during her or his term. And that way, it's not left to chance. That way, there's an orderly procedure. And that way, people don't get $1.5 billion to try to rig elections and transform the way the United States Supreme Court is run.
Yeah, no, it doesn't seem like something that's going to be solved right now, which is what makes Dan Pfeiffer's comments even more frightening. But it does. It would be good to address this at some point, given the reality right now.
What happens after Donald Trump wins? What's next for America?
Okay, if you zoom in, you can see they slipped in the words, a unified Reich. A fourth Reich, if you will. The good news is Trump wants to bring the country together. The bad news is that country is Germany in 1933.
When they saw the ad, even Confederate statues were like, you should take that down. I mean, you really, that's got to come down. That's got to come down.
Unified yike. That's not a dog whistle. That's a whistle made of dog. Evidently, MAGA now stands for Make America Germany around 1938.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. That was Late Night's take on a video former President Donald Trump shared on his Truth Social account that referred to a unified Reich as being among possible developments if he were to win re-election in November. Although the Trump campaign later tried to distance itself by saying it was not an official campaign video and also blaming a staffer for reposting it, it remained up on Trump's social media account for 19 hours before being taken down. It's worth noting that Trump has previously said that the only people permitted to post on his accounts are himself and senior advisor Dan Scavino, who worked at his golf club in Briarcliff.
Who I guess is a staffer.
Yeah. Both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris reacted to the video.
What's next for America?
Is this on his official account? Wow. A unified Reich? That's Hitler's language. That's not America's. He cares about holding on to power. I care about you.
In this moment, extremists are trying to divide our nation. And we see them as they encourage xenophobia and hate. Just yesterday, the former president of the United States, who praises dictators, who said there were very fine people on both sides in Charlottesville, let's not forget, took to social media and highlighted language from Nazi Germany. Highlighted language from Nazi Germany. This kind of rhetoric is unsurprising coming from the former president, and it is appalling. And we got to tell him who we are.
Mike Barnicle and Katty Kay are still with us, and joining us now we have Washington bureau chief at USA Today, Susan Page, and co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Simone Sanders Townsend. It's good to have you with us. And also national co-chair for President Biden's re-election campaign, Mitch Landrieu. We'll start there with you. We heard the president and the vice president responding. I know that it's a fine balance to respond to everything that comes from Trump world our way, and for the Biden campaign to do so well, it must be a huge challenge. But to me, it seems like something like this is worth noting. They're going to say, oh, you're just getting triggered. Oh, it was just a mistake. We took it down. And yet we now have a track record of this former president and how a lot of what he says happens.
Well, some very wise person once said that when somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. And of course, one of the reasons this is important to highlight is because this is part of a large pattern that has been with us since Donald Trump, unfortunately, has been with us. This election is going to be about a choice. It's going to be about a guy who gets up every day fighting for the American people, who believes that we're better together, that believes diversity is a strength, wants to build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, and is actually doing that and getting the work done, or somebody who believes that America ought to be left to just a few people and everybody else ought to stand on the side, and that his rich friends should benefit. This statement that the ex-president made, as I said, is part of a pattern. He was in favor of keeping up the Confederate monuments. He talked about back in the day when somebody said something to him about David Duke, but he didn't really know, but he tipped his hat. He talked about in Charlottesville there being, both sides to that issue. This is a tip of the hat to white supremacy and white nationalism, which is unfortunately a very important part of the ex-president's base, which goes to show you what in the world he's going to do if he gets elected again. And he's already told you he's going to be a dictator for the day. He wants to make sure that as the president, he could order SEAL Team 6 to go shoot political opponents. These are things that the American people need to weigh with great seriousness. Donald Trump can't hide behind it. Nobody messes with his social media posts.
I think people become so overwhelmed they tune out Susan Page. I mean, the white supremacy, stand back, stand by. January 6th hostages. The list goes on. Celebrating violence, celebrating what happened, laughing at what happened to Paul Pelosi. The list is so long. You could spend the entire day going through the list of things that could be frightening about a second Trump term. And then there's this whole set of Americans out there who are not just exhausted by it, but they don't kind of remember Trump's presidency the way it happened.
In a way, the impact of these comments gets less the more often they are said. But Mitch, you've worked in campaigns, and as you know, sometimes things happen in campaigns that you don't intend to happen. Mistakes happen.
Always.
People screw up. Do you think it's possible that this is an example of that, or do you think there was a deliberate decision to use the words, to spotlight the words unified Reich, which has such resonance with Nazi Germany?
Well, I don't know if it was unintentional or intentional. It just continues to happen everywhere Donald Trump goes. He's like Linus with the blanket. Everywhere this guy goes, he creates chaos. He attracts the worst of the worst.
Very, very possible.
And they continue to have this constant thread that actually sends the clear message that he once has said, that I am going to be for certain kinds of people and not others. When he says something like people are vermin or the blood is poison, that's all Third Reich stuff.
That's a chosen word. Who says Reich?
Right.
Simone.
Nobody.
I don't. Reich is not in my vocabulary.
It's not on your bingo card. It's not in your vocabulary. Do you think the Biden campaign is responding in kind effectively? Are people hearing it?
Well, with their campaign chairman sitting right next to me,
Give him some advice.
Look, I think that the response yesterday was absolutely warranted, to your point, and good. There are people out there that will say, oh, the Biden campaign talks too much about Donald Trump, and I think that those people are not paying attention. I think the rest of us talk a lot about Donald Trump. The Biden campaign actually does not talk about Donald Trump a lot. I think they have picked and chosen when to highlight him. I would say that he has said so many things and is doing so many destructive things that more is warranted. I mean, he spoke to the NRA this past weekend, and lots of attention was paid, rightfully so, to his comments about the current President Biden, and the electric chair. But there was a lot more that he said and did. And so it's kind of like where Donald Trump is concerned for the American people. It's a hear no evil, see no evil, for lack of a better term. And so because he is out of sight, out of mind for the American people, they have forgotten what he has done. But there's a balance that they have to make, because this election for people across the country is about the future. You talk about housing, you talk about the work on infrastructure that has been done and what that means for folks and what you will do if given another term. That's really what people want to hear. So you got to walk a tightrope. And I think they're walking it.
We want to show you two very contrasting messages from two former presidents on the topic of dictatorships. Take a look.
We will not be intimidated by the threats of dictators that they will regard as a breach of international law or as an act of war our aid to the democracies which dare to resist their aggression. They will not wait for an act of war on our part. They did not wait for Norway or Belgium or the Netherlands to commit an act of war.
You are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
He's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not.
drill.
That's not.
No, no.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be. You know, he keeps. We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No, no, no. Other than day one."
Okay, so what you saw first was 1941, former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt standing up to dictators during World War II, and then Donald Trump just last year vowing to be a dictator himself for a day if he returns
to the White House. It's a long day.
It has been a long day. To the White House next year. Joining us now, U.S. editor for The Economist, John Prudhoe. The magazine's latest issue takes a look at the strength of democracy here at home with a cover story entitled, and it will be my first question, is America dictator-proof? John, what's the answer?
Hi, Mika. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm not going to cheer you up after those rather gloomy poll numbers that were getting you down earlier. I mean, there are a couple of ways to look at this. There's one way, which is to look at Donald Trump and this whole debate, which frankly he started when he made those remarks, I think it was last year, about being a dictator on day one. Mm-hmm. And we all go around in circles trying to figure out, look at what he actually did when he was in office last time around, look at some of the things he said. There are debates, good debates about what he'd really do. But there's another way to look at that question, which is to depersonalize it and to take Trump out of the picture and say, OK, if America were to elect somebody who were both malign and competent, and I have real questions over whether Donald Trump is competent enough to pull this off, but were that to happen, how strong are the checks and balances? And there's mixed news, I've got to say. I mean, there are some really substantial checks on presidential authority. If you look at how dictatorships have functioned elsewhere, often a military coup's involved. That's impossible in America, I think. America's military is one of the strongest institutions in a country with deeply embedded democratic norms. But then I think it's also the case, you look at some of the formal checks on the presidency, and one of the things we've learned since 2016 is that they just don't work. Impeachment is one of the biggest checks written into the Constitution as a restraint on tyranny, and we've had ample proof over the past few years that that just doesn't work. And then if you look down the list, there are a whole bunch of emergency powers that the president has, which somebody who is really determined, I think, could exercise to subvert important democratic norms in quite a worrying way. So I'm not saying that Trump is going to do this, but I think somebody could.
So, but John, in terms of restraints upon the presidency or restraints upon a candidate running for president who happened to have sat in the Oval Office for 4 years, what would restraints or what would the restraints do to someone who, for instance, just yesterday, Donald Trump just yesterday more than suggested that the Department of Justice under President Biden had authorized use of lethal force to maybe take a shot at Donald Trump, maybe try an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. What do we do about a candidate like that? What kind of restraints would work against someone clearly not within the bounds of any restraint?
Well, so then I think you have to look back at what he did when he was in office. And again, this is the question that journalists like me tied ourselves up in knots trying to figure out. I mean, look back at some of the memoirs that people who served in his cabinet, Mark Esper writes in his memoir about Donald Trump asking if it was possible for him to give an order to shoot people in the leg shoot protesters in the leg in 2020, and he was told, no, you can't do that. And then we get into the question of, well, how serious was that? You know, is that a thing he really would have done, or is it like the remarks you guys were talking about earlier on contraception, where he says a thing and it's not quite clear, you know, how serious he is? So in terms of restraints in a case like that, I think those norms around the American military are hugely important. I mean, I spoke to a bunch of people who served in pretty senior positions in the Trump administration, and they pointed out to me that one of them said the DOD is not in a rush to operate against American citizens. So those kind of checks are really important. But I think the striking thing is, if you look through the Constitution, look through the law, it's a lot of those things that aren't written down. Norms around DOJ independence, norms around how the military would behave in time of crisis. Those are the things that are the real guarantees, rather than the stuff that's written down. And I think if you ask most Americans what they're taught in the civics class, it would be, well, the Constitution is the guarantee. And I'm not sure I think that might be a bit too comforting.
Yeah, John, I think one of the things that Trump taught all of us is that democracy is partly laws and it's partly norms and traditions. And if you have a candidate who's willing to ignore those norms and traditions, then the democracy gets put under threat. One of the things that people talk about, and the Trump campaign talks about openly wanting to do, is under this provision of Schedule F, it's called, taking a whole group of civil servants who are non-political and making them effectively political appointees, which could change America's democracy, not just for this presidency, the next presidency, but presumably for years and years and years to come. Do you think we hear that the Trump campaign is sort of more organized and more efficient and has more of a plan? Do you think it is up to the task of doing something like that, and how much of a threat would that be to democracy?
It's definitely more organised than was the case prior to 2016. I mean, I'm sure you've spoken to lots of the people I've spoken to, Cathy, in MAGA-aligned think tanks, and their plans there are quite well developed. That said, the federal bureaucracy is a huge beast, and you talk to people who've served in the White House, served in the administration, getting it to do anything is quite tough. There are 25,000 odd lawyers in the federal government, and so a Trump administration could come in really well organised with a really good, well, not good, but a determined, thorough plan. And I think it would struggle to get all of these things done. I don't think the federal bureaucracy, I don't think you can kind of wave a wand and make this stuff happen. That said, you can undermine some really important norms, and you can do a lot of stuff, right? So I guess it depends. You need to sort of calibrate your degree of alarmism. I think if you look way back, I think George Washington had a staff of 4 when he was president. The federal bureaucracy has obviously grown a huge amount over the course of the 20th century. It was interesting, the clips of FDR that we were watching a little earlier, Mika. I mean, FDR did serve 3 terms, right? Which is something that Donald Trump was sort of teasing us about the other day. But the existence of that federal bureaucracy now, which isn't written into the Constitution, is a pretty important check, I think. And I don't think you can sweep it away on day one.
No, not day one. And it is fascinating. George Washington only had 4 people working for him. And, of course, 2 of those were employed just to separate Jefferson and Hamilton. So he really was working effectively with 2 people. U.S. editor for The Economist, John Trudeau, thank you so much. Claire, I'm so glad John brought up George Washington, because I was going to come to you and just say that since 1789, the United States has depended on the goodwill of the sitting president of the United States to make the Constitution work. And we learned in the negative with Donald Trump, if you don't have that, you don't have a Constitution. I mean, Richard Nixon. People talk about Richard Nixon. There is no comparison on Nixon and Trump. Nixon lost in 60. He may have complained about it. His people may have thought, for good reason, that Illinois wasn't counted the way that it should have been counted. But he said, I'm not going to put the country through that. He conceded. When the Supreme Court came back unanimously and said you have to turn over the tapes, Nixon knew his presidency was over. Why? Because he played within the constitutional guardrails and the goodwill that we expected of presidents. Not so with Donald Trump. So what do we do moving forward?
Yeah, and let's not forget Bush Gore. Our country was
my gosh.
on a knife's edge, and the Supreme Court spoke, and there were a whole lot of people, especially people that were really familiar with the law, that were very unhappy with the Supreme Court decision. And what did Al Gore do? He did what was best for the country. We do not have that guy in Donald Trump. He is not going to do what's best for the country. And I'll tell you what worries me the most about this. What worries me the most is that bright line dividing our military from our politics. And if you all remember, Donald Trump sent over some of his idiot minions to the Department of Defense at the very end of his administration. And frankly, that was part of the reason that we had the big mess up where the National Guard was not called out quickly enough when we had his rioters trying to stab out the eyes of police officers with flagpoles. And I worry that our military is going to be weaponized in a way that would be so damaging to our country. He's talking about using the military in a domestic way. That is not what our founders wanted. Our founders did not want the military, the federal military, to be used to abuse the rule of law in this country that has been so clear about how the rule of law is supposed to work in America. And that's why I've said a number of times, I think the military leaders who know what Donald Trump is capable of, who have retired, have a strong obligation to speak out against Donald Trump between now and November.
That's the real test. Well, they
Kelly, all of those.
There's also, there's a remedy to all of this. It's called the United States Congress. It's not called the Supreme Branch for nothing, but it has to stop acting like a quasi-parliament that supports its president, each party when its president is in power, and actually be jealous of its own authority and use it. And that's how you put a check on a president who doesn't want to observe particular norms or laws and keep democracy humming.
So-called she economy is booming. According to the latest numbers, women-owned businesses grew at nearly double the rate of men-owned companies from 2019 to 2023, with fertility care and health and wellness industries leading the way. In fact, the Women Presidents Association, a nonprofit for women business leaders, just released its 2024 list of the 50 fastest-growing women-owned and led companies. Fertility startup Kind Body took the top spot, followed by Symbiotica, a San Diego-based health and wellness company. I'll tell you, the fertility companies and the companies that help with benefits for fertility, they're booming because women are realizing they have a long runway and they can make these choices along the way. And businesses want to retain great female employees, and that's the way to do it. Here to tell us more, Forbes Women editor Maggie McGrath. Maggie, you've been covering this for Forbes. We're covering it on Know Your Value with Daniela Pierre-Bravo. What were the big takeaways from the list of these women-owned and led companies? The average honoree, by the way, I just want to say, 50 over 50 list, was 54 years old.
Yes, that's right, Mika. These 50 companies employ more than 18,000 people, have a collective $7 billion in revenue, and are led by CEOs who have an average age of 54. Now, this should not surprise us. We know from the women of the 50 over 50 that age and experience are advantages in running and growing sustainable businesses. I spoke with the CEO of Women's President Organization, Camille Burns, and she said that one of the interesting trends, other than the fact that, yes, you pointed out health and wellness, direct-to-consumer companies, those are sector-based trends she saw on this list. One of the other really interesting trends is that experience is driving this growth. Oftentimes, Camille told me, CEOs of small businesses and startups are afraid to invest in resources that feel too expensive for the company's budget. But it's when they spend that money on the senior executive or the piece of technology that felt too expensive, that's when they see the company's growth. And Mika, I think that's such an important lesson, not just for founders and CEOs, but for all women. You have to invest in resources in order to grow.
Yep. And you spoke with the Kind Body founder and executive chairman, Gina Bartese, who was also honored on Forbes and Know Your Value's 50 over 50 list last year. What did Gina, who's really known as the OG fertility founder, have to say about the growing business opportunity in family building.
Well, I asked Gina about the challenges of running a fertility company in America in 2024 when we have state-by-state differences in reproductive health laws that could affect the way her customers access care and the way her company operates. But she said that the political landscape has not been a hindrance to her business. Customer demand continues to grow and is, in fact, the largest driver for her business's growth. Globally, we see 1 in 6 adults struggling with fertility, and in the U.S., those numbers are slightly larger. And we see the numbers for her own company. She recorded $180 million in revenue last year, said she's on track for $250 million, and she thinks it could be a multi-billion-dollar business. And she was very careful to note that IVF and fertility planning should not be partisan issues.
Right. And speaking of 50 over 50 founders, the nominations deadline for our 4th annual, I'm so proud to say, U.S. list, 50 over 50 list, is fast approaching. It is May 30th, so 8 days away. Maggie, how is it going? What do our viewers need to know about nominating a woman who has proven success, has no age limit? And you know what I always say, you don't need to wait for somebody to nominate you. You can just do it yourself. Like, nominate
Well, there's
yourself.
no deadline for success and innovation, but there is a deadline for these nominations. It is May 30th. It's been going really well. We've read some fabulous stories of resilience and gutsy business decisions. We want to see more of these. We are looking for founders and leaders across all sectors, and I especially want to see more founders and leaders in STEM fields, traditionally male-dominated fields. I wanted to answer a commonly asked question we've been getting. This list does not include posthumous figures. We've been so touched by some of these stories, but we are looking for women who were born in or before 1973 and are actively making a difference on this planet today. So if that describes you or someone you know, please, please, please tell us all about her.
Yes, Maggie McGrath, thank you so much. Again, talk about yourself, ladies. To read more about the fastest growing women-owned companies, head over to knowyourvalue.com. Daniela has a great piece about this. We spoke to several of the founders and got their best advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. And for all the details and guidelines about the 50 over 50 list, go to Forbes.com or knowyourvalue.com to get your nominations in today. And Caddy and Susan Page is here for the next hour. We did have women lying up about their age.
I love that.
And we're like, sorry, you're 49 and a half.
Yeah,
That's a no can do. Sorry.
Did you ever hear that? That's great.
Yeah, it was fun to say no.
It just occurred to me, I know somebody I want to nominate. I just realized, just as I was listening, I thought, don't you think? And you listen to the thing, and it's a great reminder because there are so many amazing
I love it. Okay, Michelle Andrews here too. We're going to get ready for the next hour. Still